The world didn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ended with a malfunctioning teleportation hub and a human named Ted. Nexus 23, the most critical node in the multiverse, a place where universes intersected like it was Black Friday and everyone wanted the same toaster. A little chaotic, a lot dangerous, and now Ted had ensured it was a complete clusterfuck. "You know what your problem is, Jax," Lieutenant Embers was saying, her voice a mix of irritation and amusement that's like an espresso shot for cynics. "I didn't say yes when you asked me out," Captain Jax Vorton shot back, eyes not leaving the chaos displayed on the ship's console. A series of red lights blinked furiously, each one heralding a new disaster in a universe where disasters were as common as overpriced coffee. "No, you think too small. I was talking about your inability to wear pants that fit," Embers replied, smirking. "But this," she waved at the console, "this is something else. Somewhere in the multiverse," they said, "was a universe where everything made sense and people weren't idiots. This wasn't it. So what's the official problem, techie?" Jax asked, glancing at the tech specialist, Lyra. She was elbow-deep in wires, looking like she was trying to defuse a bomb with a hangover. "Officially, the problem is Ted," she replied, not looking up. "Unofficially, the problem is Ted too, but with more swearing." "Ted," Jax said, like the name itself was an insult. "Yep, that Ted," Lyra confirmed. "The one who thought it was a good idea to mix universes like he's making a cocktail. Nexus 23 was supposed to be foolproof. Then again, they hadn't factored in the determination of fools. Isn't Ted the guy who tried to microwave his lunch and ended up teleporting his food into someone else's stomach?" Embers asked, because humor was better than screaming. "Same guy," Lyra said, pulling a wire with a satisfying snap. "And now he's gone and crossed a few wires somewhere important. If we don't fix this," Jax said, "we might end up with a universe where it's cats that rule everything. Or worse, a universe where reality TV is considered art," Embers added. They both shuddered. Some things were just too grim to contemplate. "So in your professional opinion, Lyra," Jax asked, "how screwed are we? On a scale of 1 to Ted?" "Yeah, about a 3, Lyra said. "But that's only if we fix it before Ted decides to help again." Jax turned to Embers, who was already gearing up. "All right, team, time to save the multiverse from Ted, again. Do we get overtime for this?" Embers joked, strapping on her equipment. "Sure," Jax said, "but it's paid in I told you so's." The teleportation hub was a metal monstrosity, filled with blinking lights and screens displaying incomprehensible data. It was as if someone designed the control room after a particularly bad night of drinking. "All systems nominal, my ass," Jax muttered, running a hand through his hair. "They really should put that on the recruitment posters," Embers said with a wry smile. "Join us. You'll get confused, frustrated, and occasionally save reality as we know it." "You say that like it's not the dream job," Lyra chimed in, fiddling with a screwdriver in a way that suggested she could use it to incapacitate someone if needed. "All right, kids," Jax declared, clapping his hands together. "Let's find Ted before he decides to rewrite physics again." They moved through the corridors, the utilitarian metal hallways echoing their footsteps like a Greek chorus of impending doom. "So what exactly did Ted do?" Embers asked. "He tried to upgrade the system," Lyra explained bitterly, "which is fancy talk for he screwed up big time." "Ted's a programmer in the same way I'm a gourmet chef," Jax commented. "I can make toast, but you don't want me handling soufflés." "Noted," Embers said, glancing at a door that was slightly ajar. "Hey, isn't that the control room, where the magic or lack thereof happens?" Jax sighed. "Yeah, or as it's currently known, the room of oh God, not again." They entered the control room, and it was immediately clear that the situation was worse than they thought. If the multiverse was a delicate chandelier, then Ted had just taken a baseball bat to it. "Wow," Jax said, staring at the chaos. "It's like Picasso and a toddler collaborated on this." "Looks like Ted's been busy," Embers said, surveying the mess of wires and panels. "Busy?" Lyra scoffed. "Busy is an understatement. This is why Ted shouldn't be allowed near anything more complex than a pencil." "So where's the man of the hour?" Jax asked, the sarcasm practically dripping off his words. Probably hiding, Lyra said, or trying to fix it by pressing more random buttons. Great, Jax said. We'll be lucky if he doesn't accidentally summon Cthulhu. I dunno, might be an improvement, Embers quipped. All right, Jax said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if we can unfuck this mess. Lyra, start with the main panel. Embers, watch for any surprises. I'll try to track down our favorite disaster artist. Lyra nodded, already elbows deep in a panel that looked like it had been assembled by a drunk octopus. Embers kept her hand near her blaster. In this place, surprise could mean anything from a power surge to a new law of physics. As Jax moved through the corridors, he couldn't help but think about how close they were to a disaster of cosmic proportions, all thanks to one human error. Somewhere someone was probably writing a report on this, and Jax hoped they'd include a section on why we don't let Ted touch things. He found Ted in the storage bay, looking guilty as hell. Ted, Jax said, hands on hips like a disappointed parent. What the hell did you do? Ted looked up, face a picture of remorse mixed with confusion. I was just following the manual, Captain. Which manual, Ted? The How to Accidentally Destroy Reality manual. No, the regular one, Ted replied feebly. But it's all in technobabble. Ted, most of us learned to translate technobabble by the age of 10, Jax said. What did you do? Ted shuffled his feet. I thought I'd tweak the settings a little. You know, make things more efficient. Efficient. Ted, you can't even make scrambled eggs without setting off the fire alarm. Ted's shoulders sagged. I just wanted to help, Jax sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, Ted, you're going to help us fix this. Really? Ted's face lit up with misguided hope. Yeah, you're going to sit next to Lyra and not touch anything unless she tells you to. Ted nodded eagerly. I can do that. Back in the control room, Lyra was making progress, or at least Jax hoped so. Ember stood guard, tapping her boot impatiently. Got Ted, Jax announced, pushing Ted gently forward. He'll be your assistant. Oh joy, Lyra said, handing Ted a tool with the precision of someone cutting the wire on a bomb. Here, Ted, hold this. Ted took it like it was the greatest honor he'd ever received. So what's the plan? Embers asked, watching the displays carefully. Plan is we fix this before Ted's nickname becomes the end of everything, Jax said. A noble cause, Embers said with a smirk. Ted, for once, kept quiet and followed instructions, which was close to a miracle. Okay, I think I've got it, Lyra finally said, her voice a mix of triumph and exhaustion. We just need to reroute the power and reset the system. And that won't, you know, unravel the fabric of the multiverse, Jax asked. If it does, we won't have to worry about it for long, Lyra replied, flipping a switch. The room hummed with energy, lights flickering like they were caught between dimensions. For a moment, reality seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if they'd gotten it right. Then the lights steadied, the alarms quieted, and the multiverse seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Well, that's anticlimactic, Embers said. Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Lyra, you magnificent bastard, he said. Just doing my job, she replied with a grin, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. But maybe next time we keep Ted away from the buttons. I'm all for that, Jax said, clapping Ted on the shoulder. Good job not making things worse, Ted. Ted beamed like he'd just been awarded Employee of the Month. So what's next, Captain? Embers asked. Next, Jax said, we get a drink and then we make sure this doesn't happen again. And if it does, Lyra asked. Jax shrugged. Then we hope the universe has a good sense of humor. As they made their way out of the control room, Jax couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd all learned something today. Well, except Ted. But miracles weren't really his department. Let someone else try unraveling that mystery. Jax Vorton was no stranger to chaos. In fact, he had a long-standing relationship with it. But even he had to admit that the situation with the teleportation hub was taking their dysfunctional bond to a whole new level. He scratched the stubble on his chin as he stared at the tangled mess of wires and flashing panels. It looked like a robot had vomited its insides all over the room. Lyra, how's it looking? Can we at least pretend we're not one step away from inventing a new disaster? He asked, his voice a cocktail of sarcasm and doubt. Lyra Quibble, the ship's eccentric engineer, was on her back beneath the main console, tools splayed out around her like the aftermath of a hardware massacre. She poked her head out, goggles perched on her forehead, giving her an owl-like appearance. "If by pretend you mean lie through our teeth, then sure, we're golden," she said, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. "Great, because nothing screams reliable crew quite like false hope," Jax replied, crossing his arms. "Captain," chimed in Dr. Taryn Flux, the ship's pragmatic scientist, who was leaning against a terminal with the casual ease of someone who was probably calculating the odds of survival in his head. "I think we've got bigger issues than just Ted's incompetence." "Go on," Jax said, giving him a look that said he'd love to hear what could possibly outshine Ted's mess-ups. Flux adjusted his glasses, which seemed to be perpetually smudged. "The algorithms Ted tampered with weren't just for basic operations. They were also linked to the interdimensional stabilizers. We've got random overlaps happening across Nexus 23, and if we don't fix it, we'll have a multiverse soup on our hands." "So, Ted didn't just bake the cake wrong, he also accidentally swapped out salt for arsenic," Lyra grumbled, pulling herself upright. "That's one way to put it," Flux agreed, tapping away at his console. "The overlaps are causing reality to buckle in on itself. It's like trying to cram a whale into a teacup. Pretty soon that teacup is going to break." Jax sighed and rubbed his temples. "Fantastic. We're not just screwing up our universe, we're doing it on a cosmic scale. Maybe next we could try screwing up the laws of gravity. See if we can't get everything to just float away." Embers snorted from her post by the door. "Hey, it could solve our weight issues." "Right," Jax said. "Let's get to work. Lyra, can you untangle whatever the hell Ted did with those algorithms?" "I'll give it a shot," she said, pulling up her sleeves. "But it's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle when half the pieces are missing and the other half have been chewed up by a dog." Flux looked up from his calculations. "I've also found some anomalies in the data logs. It seems Ted wasn't entirely to blame. You might want to have a word with our AI." Jax blinked. "The AI? What did it do? Read Ted's mind and decide to join in on the fun?" Flux shrugged. "More like it tried to compensate for his errors and ended up making things worse. So our AI is like everyone else on this ship. At least it fits in," Embers chuckled. Jax shook his head, suppressing a smile. "All right, let's see if we can't salvage this mess before it becomes an even bigger headline." The crew set to work, each at their station. The room was filled with the sound of clattering tools, rapid keystrokes, and the occasional muttered curse. It was a symphony of desperation and determination, each note tinged with the silent prayer that the universe wouldn't collapse on their watch. Lyra had her head buried in the console again, wires spilling over her shoulders like metallic dreadlocks. "I might have something," she called out, voice muffled by the panels. "But it's a long shot." "A long shot is better than no shot," Jax replied. "What's the plan?" "We reroute power from the secondary systems to give the stabilizers a jolt," Lyra explained, her hands moving like a conductor in a mechanical orchestra. "If we're lucky, it'll reset the algorithms to their default state." "And if we're not lucky?" Embers asked, raising an eyebrow. "Then we get to find out firsthand what happens when two universes decide to occupy the same space," Lyra said with a grim smile. "No pressure then," Jax said. "Let's make it happen." Lyra threw herself into the task with a fervor that would have been impressive if it wasn't also slightly terrifying. Ted hovered nearby, desperately trying to be helpful without being in the way, a feat that until now had been beyond his capabilities. "Just hold the damn flashlight, Ted," Lyra snapped, as he fumbled with a tool. "Sorry," he squeaked, managing to get the light in the right place on his third attempt. Flux was monitoring the stabilizers, his eyes darting across the screens like a hawk tracking prey. "The overlaps are getting more frequent," he said. "We need to do this now." "All right, let's see if we can coax this thing into cooperating," Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the controls. Jax, hit the override on my mark. Jax's hand hovered over the button. I'm trusting you, Lyra. Don't make me regret it. You'll be too busy being non-existent if this doesn't work, she quipped. 3, 2, 1, now. Jax slammed the button, and the room was bathed in an eerie, flickering glow. For a moment, everything held its breath, the crew, the ship, the universe itself, as if it was waiting to see if they'd done enough to appease whatever cosmic force was watching. Then, with a high-pitched whine that threatened to split the fabric of reality, the system rebooted. The lights steadied, the panels calmed, and the alarms that had been blaring suddenly fell silent. "Did it work?" Embers asked, a note of hope in her voice. Lyra checked the readouts, her expression unreadable. I think we did it," she said slowly. The relief in the room was palpable, a collective exhalation of tension that had been wound tight enough to snap. Jax swore he felt the ship itself relax just a little. "Nice work, team," Jax said, clapping Lyra on the shoulder. "I knew you could pull it off." Lyra grinned, wiping her hands on her overalls. "Couldn't have done it without my trusty flashlight holder," she joked, nodding at Ted. Really?" Ted stammered, eyes wide. "Don't push it," she replied, but there was a gleam of genuine appreciation in her eyes. Flux was already double-checking the data. "Looks like the interdimensional stabilizers are back online. Crisis averted, for now. Let's hope the universe takes a break from trying to kill us for a bit," Embers said, holstering her blaster. Jax nodded, surveying his crew with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "All right, let's get this place cleaned up and see if we can't keep Ted from touching anything important for the foreseeable future. Should we make that an official policy?" Lyra asked, only half joking. "Absolutely," Jax replied. "And maybe we should look into retraining the AI to not accept suggestions from anyone with Ted's clearance level." "Good call," Flux said, still engrossed in his work. As the crew began to tidy the control room, Jax allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. They'd managed to avert disaster once again, proving that even in a universe with endless possibilities for catastrophe, they could hold their own. "All right, people," Jax said, clapping his hands together. "Once this place is back in order, drinks are on me." "Do we get hazard pay for today?" Embers asked, tongue firmly in cheek. Jax smirked. "Sure, but you'll have to take it in thank yous and job well dones." "I'll take what I can get," she replied. As they set about putting the control room back to rights, Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with his crew. They might be stuck in the most chaotic node in the multiverse, but at least they were stuck there together. And if there was one thing Jax had learned, it was that a good team could face down just about anything, even if that anything happened to be a universe-threatening screw-up courtesy of Ted. As they wrapped up their work, the room started feeling less like a disaster zone and more like the heart of their ship once again. The familiar hum of the engines was back, a comforting reminder that for all its faults, the ship was still home. "All right, team," Jax said, leaning against the newly stabilized console. "Let's get out of here before the universe changes its mind." "Sounds like a plan," Lyra said, stretching her arms over her head with a yawn. Ted, for his part, was just happy to be included as they made their way out of the control room, the chaos of the past hours slowly receding into memory. As they stepped into the corridor, Jax couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Sure, the universe was still a mess of contradictions and chaos, but so was he. Maybe that was why they got along so well. And as for Ted, well, Jax figured they'd keep him around. After all, every ship needed a scapegoat, and Ted filled that role perfectly. "Here's to surviving another day," Jax said, raising an imaginary glass. "To surviving," his crew echoed, their voices buoyed by the shared relief of having narrowly dodged disaster once again. For now, at least, the multiverse was safe. And for Jax and his team, that was enough. The moment of calm was like a cat poised on the edge of a bathtub, just waiting for the right moment to plunge its paw into chaos again. Nexus 23, with all its tangled wires and blinking panels, seemed to collectively exhale. though it was more likely just a mechanical wheeze from the teleportation hub trying desperately not to implode. It was a temporary victory. All too soon the universe would remind them of its endless capacity for calamity. True to form, it wasn't long before the so-called victory was interrupted by the universe deciding it was time for a bit of fun. The air shimmered, and the control room suddenly hosted a new guest, a creature that looked like it had been designed by a committee that couldn't quite agree if they wanted a dragon or a jellyfish. It hovered, translucent and menacing, tentacles wafting through the air with a gentle menace. "Well," Jax said, eyeing the beast with a disturbingly calm demeanor. "I guess our invitation got lost in the mail. Or maybe this is Ted's new pet," Embers suggested, eyeing Ted sideways. Ted blanched. "I promise I haven't touched anything since the flashlight. Maybe we can train it to keep Ted from touching things," Lyra quipped, her fingers twitching towards her toolkit as if she could fix this mess with a wrench. The creature, apparently bored of its own introduction, decided to make itself at home by melting a nearby console with a disturbingly polite exhalation of acid. "Well, that's one way to redecorate," Jax commented, gesturing for his team to back away slowly. "Anyone know how to evict a transdimensional squatter?" Flux, the ever-stoic scientist, was already scanning the creature, his eyes darting across his handheld readout. "It appears to exist in multiple phases of reality simultaneously," he said. "So, no, I don't have a bloody clue." "Fantastic," Jax muttered. "All right, team, let's improvise." "Lyra, any chance we can reroute it back to wherever it crawled out from?" "Only if it's got a ticket and a smile," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she tapped away at her console, considering the infinite array of universes that might be missing a tentacle beast. Embers, always one to act rather than wait, unholstered her blaster. "Maybe we can just convince it to leave the old-fashioned way." The creature seemed to take offense at this suggestion, letting out a low, resonant hum that made the lights flicker like they were caught in a bad horror movie. "Okay, point taken," she muttered, lowering the blaster slightly. "Suggestions?" Jax tapped his chin thoughtfully, glancing at Ted, then quickly deciding against it. "What if we adjust the frequency of the stabilizers to match its phase?" he suggested. "Maybe we can send it packing without inviting its friends." Flux nodded, seemingly impressed by either the idea or the fact that Jax was still standing after all the chaos. "It's as good a plan as any," he agreed. "Lyra, can you handle it?" "Sure, why not?" she said, as if this was a normal part of her day job. "I just hope it doesn't decide to start nesting in my toolbox." The creature continued its leisurely destruction, humming contentedly to itself as it corroded yet another panel. Jax could almost admire its dedication to the craft of chaos. "Right, let's give it a shot," Lyra said, initiating the adjustments with a series of deft keystrokes. "Jax, get ready on that override again." Jax nodded, his finger hovering over the button like it was the trigger of a particularly finicky grenade. "On your mark." For the second time in as many hours, the room was bathed in that eerie glow, as if the universe itself was holding its breath again. The creature seemed to flicker, caught between one reality and the next, before dissolving into a fine mist and vanishing completely. Silence reigned for a moment, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's systems rebooting again. "Did we just evict it?" Ted asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Looks like it," Lyra replied, rubbing her palms on her overalls again. "Consider that a lesson in how to handle interdimensional pests." "Someone should write a manual," Embers suggested dryly. "Interdimensional beast extermination for dummies." "It'd be a bestseller," Jax quipped, finally relaxing his stance. "And probably a lot more useful than Ted's guide to ship sabotage." "Hey, I'm learning," Ted protested, though he seemed slightly mollified by the jest rather than offended. Before anyone could get too comfortable, the ship shook violently, a groan rippling through its structure. The control room screens flickered, displaying a kaleidoscope of clashing realities, each one trying to assert dominance over the current moment. Looks like the multiverse wants to remind us who's in charge, Flux commented, his voice dry as desert sand. Is it too late to put in for a transfer? Embers asked, trying to keep her balance as the floor vibrated beneath them. Lyra had already turned back to her console, brow furrowed in concentration. We've got multiple streams collapsing in on each other, she announced. The overlaps are getting worse. Well, we wouldn't want things to get boring, Jax said, as another reality flickered across the screens, this one featuring a landscape of towering crystalline structures under a violet sky. It's like a cosmic game of Russian roulette, Flux muttered, punching numbers into his calculator with a fervor that bordered on religious. All right, Jax said, pulling the team's attention back to the task at hand. We need to stabilize the hub before something even more unpleasant decides to drop in. No more tentacle beasties, please, Ted said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra chuckled, despite the tension. Seconded. Flux, what's our best bet? Flux considered for a moment, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both irritation and deep focus. If we can isolate the streams and reroute them individually, we might stand a chance of stopping the cascade. Like herding cats, Jax observed, hands on hips, with a flamethrower and a blindfold. But hey, I'm game if you are. As the team moved into action, the air seemed to grow heavier, each breath tinged with static. The ship groaned again, but this time it was a more determined sound, like an old soldier pulling itself together for one last stand. Let's show the universe what we're made of, Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the console with a determination that belied the chaos around her. Embers was at the ready, weapon in hand, just in case the universe had any more surprises in store. Ted was, mercifully, keeping his hands to himself, though he hovered near enough to be of some assistance or at least not in the way. First stream isolated, Flux called out, his tone urgent but calm. It's holding stable for now. Good, Jax replied. Let's keep it that way. The ship bucked like a wild thing, and the sound of cracking glass echoed through the control room as another reality threatened to spill through. Second stream ready, Lyra announced, her voice steady. Jax, we need that override. Jax didn't need to be told twice. His finger hit the button with the kind of precision that only comes from having absolutely no other choice. The ship shuddered, lights dimming and then flaring back to brilliance as the systems fought to maintain some semblance of balance. Status, Jax barked, looking around at his crew. Lyra checked her console, a grin spreading across her face. I think we might just have pulled it off, she said, voice tinged with relief. Stabilizers are holding. Nice work, Jax said, fighting the urge to let out a whoop of triumph. Flux, looks like the multiverse is back to being just one universe at a time, Flux confirmed, his relief more restrained but no less palpable. Is that it? Ted asked, hopeful. Is it over? For now, Embers said, giving him a pat on the back that was meant to be reassuring but likely felt more like a thump. Until the universe decides to throw another curveball. Which it will, Jax said, but there was a warmth to his voice that suggested he wouldn't have it any other way, not with this crew at least. As they set about repairing the damage and ensuring that no more interdimensional visitors would drop by for tea, Jax couldn't help but reflect on the peculiar satisfaction of having faced down the multiverse itself and come out the other side. Sure, the universe was still a ruthless mess, and they were all one mistake away from cosmic disaster, but they were still standing. At Nexus 23, that was more than enough of a win. All right, Jax said, clapping his hands together in a dusting-off gesture. Let's finish up here before the universe changes its mind and we have to do it all over again. Here's to surviving the day, Embers said, echoing the earlier toast with a grin. To surviving, the crew agreed, voices mingling in a harmony that was more hopeful than cynical, if only for a fleeting moment. And with that, they plunged back into the organized chaos of their lives, knowing full well that the universe would never let them rest easy, and that they wouldn't have it any other way. The newly stable Nexus 23 hummed with a deceptive serenity, the kind that made you wonder if the universe was just taking a break before hitting you with something worse. Something like, say, a particularly hungry black hole or a reality where Mondays never ended. Jax, naturally, had an eye for trouble, and his gut instinct was doing cartwheels. "All right, team," Jax announced, his voice a medley of forced cheer and impending doom. "Let's enjoy this brief moment of not dying while we can," and the console let out a screech louder than a banshee with a megaphone. Jax winced, staring at the display in disbelief. A new reality was trying to merge with theirs, and this one was considerably less friendly. If the initial readings were anything to go by, it involved an awful lot of fire and screaming. "Oh, just what we needed, an interdimensional barbecue," Lyra quipped, eyes glued to her terminal. "Anyone got marshmallows? Preferably the fireproof kind," Embers added, already eyeing the bulkheads like they might suddenly sprout fangs and pounce. "Flux, what are we dealing with?" Jax asked, because when your ship's being consumed by apocalyptic flames from another universe, you turn to the guy with the calculator. Dr. Terran Flux, ever the image of calm under impossible pressure, adjusted his glasses with that signature flourish of irritation. "Well, if my calculations are correct, and they always are unless Ted's had his fingers in the pie, we're about to get a first-hand experience of a firestorm apocalypse." "Great," Jax replied, with the tone of someone who had long since resigned himself to cosmic jokes at his expense. "Suggestions, people. Fan the flames until they burn themselves out," Embers suggested, half joking, half serious, her blaster still warmed up and ready. "We could try redirecting the streams," Lyra offered, her mind already racing through the ship's circuits like a caffeinated squirt. "Isolate the affected reality and give it a shove back through the stabilizer." "That's an idea," Jax admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Any chance it won't turn the ship into a crispy husk?" "Well, there's always a chance," Lyra replied brightly, which was as reassuring as a life vest made of lead. Ted, ever the optimist, piped up. "Maybe it's not as bad as it looks." The ship chose that moment to shudder violently, metal screaming under stress as if to personally rebuke Ted's hopeful nonsense. "All right, let's prioritize not getting roasted," Jax said, slapping a hand on Flux's shoulder as though it might somehow imbue him with more ideas. "Suggestions? We need a diversion," Embers said, her gaze distant in thought. "Something to draw the heat away from the stabilizers, maybe give us a chance to isolate the stream." "A distraction, huh?" Jax mused, tapping his chin. "Lyra, any chance you can rig something up?" Lyra's eyes sparkled with the mischief of a kid who just found a fireworks stash. "Oh, I've got just the thing," she said, diving into her bag of tricks, or as she liked to call it, the everything but the kitchen sink kit. While Lyra got busy, Jax turned to Embers. "You think you can keep the situation from getting worse?" "I can try," she said, her grin as sharp as a blade. But no promises. Flux, meanwhile, was already working on calculations that would make Einstein weep. "We're going to need precise timing on this," he said, his fingers dancing across his handheld. "One misstep and we'll be juggling fireballs." "Noted," Jax said. "Ted, you're on standby." "Just stand there and do what you do best." Ted nodded nervously, fully aware that what he did best was generally nothing helpful. "All right, Lyra," Jax said, watching her assemble something that looked suspiciously like a homemade bomb. "What have you got?" "Something explosive enough to make things interesting," she replied, with the enthusiasm of a mad scientist about to test their latest creation. "If I can get this into the core, it should give us the blowback we need." "Blowback being the operative word," Flux muttered. "And the ship won't blow up with it, right?" Ted asked, eyes wide. "Hopefully," Lyra said, which was about as good as it got these days. "Okay, folks, let's get moving," Jax said, clapping his hands like a coach rallying a particularly hapless team. "Embers, you're with Lyra to set the charge. Flux, monitor the stabilizers. Ted, keep doing what you're doing." With military precision, or as close as you got on a ship held together by duct tape and dreams, the team sprang into action. Lyra and Embers slipped away, moving with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first rodeo with potential annihilation. They reached the ship's core, the heat already stifling like being inside an oven with anger issues. "All right, the central panel should do it," Lyra said, popping the casing open with a deft flick of her wrist. "Hand me the charge." Embers passed it over, their eyes meeting in unspoken understanding. "You sure about this?" "Never been surer of anything in my life," Lyra replied, which was only somewhat true. She set the device, fingers moving with the grace of a concert pianist. "Let's get back before this thing decides to introduce us to a new definition of hot." Back in the control room, Flux was a picture of concentration, monitoring the stabilizers with the intensity of a man playing chess with death himself. "We're ready when you are," he said over the comm. "On our way," Embers replied, and they sprinted back toward the hub, hearts pounding with the anticipation of chaos. Jax, meanwhile, was keeping an eye on the burgeoning flames displayed on the monitors, the sight more than a little unnerving. "Anyone got a good fire extinguisher joke?" he asked, trying to ease the tension. "Why did the fire extinguisher break up with the match?" Ted ventured, eyes darting nervously between the screens. "It was too hot to handle." "Don't quit your day job," Jax replied dryly, though he appreciated the effort. As Embers and Lyra burst back into the room, Jax aimed a thumbs up at Lyra. "You ready to light this candle?" "Born ready," Lyra said, hitting the switch with a flourish that would have put any Vegas showgirl to shame. The ship lurched, and for a moment it felt like they were stuck in the world's most aggressive snow globe. But then, bit by bit, the flames receded, the firestorm collapsing in on itself like a soufflé meeting cold air. "We did it," Flux said, though his voice was as much disbelief as triumph. "Reality's holding steady." "Never doubted us for a second," Jax lied, beaming at his crew as if they hadn't been one hot foot away from oblivion. "You guys are legends. And I assume we don't have to pay for damages in other universes, right?" Lyra joked, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Not unless they send a bill," Jax replied, though it was entirely possible the multiverse had its own collection agency. "All right, folks, let's get this place cleaned up before." Another tremor rocked the ship, followed by an ominous silence. "Did I say something about cleaning?" Jax asked, glancing around at his team. "Maybe the universe just doesn't like your tone," Embers suggested, holstering her blaster. "Either way, looks like we've still got work to do," Flux said, already delving back into calculations like a monk at prayer. Lyra sighed, the sound carrying both exasperation and a strange kind of joy. "Guess we're not done yet." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Jax said, game face on despite the chaos. With the immediate threat gone, the crew set about restoring order, each step a testament to their resilience and sheer bloody-mindedness. Nexus 23 might have been a death trap waiting for its moment of glory, but it was their death trap, and they'd be damned if they let it go without a fight. "Here's to another round," Jax said, raising an imaginary glass. "To improbable victories," Lyra agreed, echoing him with a grin. As the crew settled into the rhythm of recovery, it was clear that while their universe might be a relentless mess, there was nowhere else they'd rather be than right here, in the thick of it, with each other. After all, who wouldn't want to face down the multiverse's worst with a crew who knew how to laugh in the face of doom? The universe, ever the prankster, decided to remind Jax and his crew that things could always get worse. While the firestorm had been shoved back to its corner of the multiverse, the ship was now groaning like an old man getting out of bed. If their ship was a person, it would be the kind of guy who smoked 3 packs a day and thought jogging was a localized natural disaster. "All right, folks," Jax announced, trying to sound like a man who still had a plan. "Let's not start patting ourselves on the back just yet. We still have a whole lot of what the hell to deal with. And here I thought we were done with the fun," Lyra quipped, wiping engine grease off her hands as if it were the world's least fashionable lotion. Flux, ever the stoic, peered at his readout with all the joy of a man attending his own funeral. "Turns out redirecting firestorms doesn't exactly rate as a permanent solution." We're still sitting on a cosmic powder keg. Great, Jax muttered, crossing his arms. What are our options? And please, someone tell me it doesn't involve us playing hot potato with another apocalypse. Embers leaned against a wall, her casual demeanor at odds with the persistent alarms. Is running screaming in circles an option? Because I think I could rock that. Regrettably, no, Flux said dryly, punching numbers into his handheld like it owed him money. But I do have to point out that our stabilizers are more unstable than a drunk octopus on roller skates. Ted, bless his heart, was doing what he did best, staying out of the way and looking only mildly panicked. Maybe we could, I dunno, ask the universe nicely to stop trying to kill us. Yeah, Ted, Jax replied, rolling his eyes. I'll be sure to send the universe a strongly worded letter. Maybe that'll show it. Lyra snorted. We'd get a return to sender stamp so fast our heads would spin. Look, we need to think, Jax said, rubbing his temples. His voice had that edge of desperation that usually preceded someone doing something either very brave or very stupid. Flux, what's the status of the stabilizers? Held together by hope, dreams, and a bit of spit, Flux replied. In short, not great. Jax sighed, feeling the weight of the universe's most ridiculous problems resting squarely on his shoulders. So, we need another fix. And fast. Lyra, who had been staring at the tangled mess of wires like a cat sizing up a particularly mean-looking bird, suddenly had that glint in her eye, the one that usually preceded her best and most dangerous ideas. What if we, I don't know, leaned into the chaos? Jax raised an eyebrow. Care to elaborate before I start laughing hysterically? Well, Lyra continued, gesturing animatedly, we know the stabilizers are screwed up because the algorithms got all wonky right. But what if we use that? Like, exploit the random overlaps to push the bad stuff back where it came from. Use chaos to fight chaos. Embers laughed, the sound carrying a tinge of madness. So, you're suggesting we gamble with reality itself? I didn't even bring my lucky dice. Jax frowned, but it was the contemplative kind of frown that meant Lyra might be onto something. Sounds a bit like trying to cure a hangover with more booze. But it's so crazy it might just work, Lyra argued, the enthusiasm in her voice infectious. We've got nothing to lose except everything. Flux looked up from his calculations, eyes narrowed in consideration. If we can program a controlled failure, an intentional glitch, we might be able to isolate the dangerous elements and eject them. But the timing would have to be precise, no room for error. Well, at least it's a plan, Jax said, nodding slowly. And one that's not entirely insane. Ted, appearing slightly more hopeful than usual, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. And, what if it fails? Then we'll have bigger problems than worrying about mortgage payments, Embers said with a grin that was more wolfish than reassuring. All right, let's do this, Jax decided, his usual bravado shining through like a beacon in the chaos. Lyra, you and Flux work on the code. Embers, keep an eye on the ship's vitals. Ted, stand around and look pretty, Ted suggested, his face an open book of nervousness. Exactly, Jax replied, clapping Ted on the shoulder. Wouldn't want you doing anything rash like helping. While Lyra and Flux dove into the digital entrails of the ship systems, Jax paced, his mind a storm of thoughts. Could they really pull this off? Was it even possible to control something inherently uncontrollable? Hey Jax, ever think you'd be playing interdimensional roulette when you signed up for this gig? Embers asked, her eyes on the monitors. Honestly, I figured more space exploration, less trying not to die in spectacular new ways, Jax admitted, a wry smile playing at his lips. Flux and Lyra's fingers danced across the console, an intricate ballet that, if successful, could mean the difference between life and death. It was like defusing a bomb, except they'd never seen this type of explosive before, and the timer was set by a cosmic prankster with a sick sense of humor. Almost there, Flux said, his voice a study in calm concentration. Just a few more adjustments. Lyra was chewing her lip, a habit she had when the pressure rose higher than a casino's insurance premium. Once we hit this, We'll either push the bad stuff out or we'll end up somewhere even weirder. If we end up in a universe made of pudding, I'm going to be more upset than you can imagine, Jax noted, half serious. Finally, Lyra leaned back, stretching her arms over her head with a satisfied sigh. All right, we're set. Ready when you are. Flux gave a nod, and the whole crew seemed to hold their breath. On your mark, Jax. Jax took a deep breath, the weight of leadership heavier than ever. All right, folks, let's send this sucker packing. With a flourish, Jax hit the override button. Time seemed to shudder, as if the whole universe had paused to watch this one moment unfold. The ship vibrated, a soft hum escalating into a full-bodied roar. It was like riding a roller coaster with a screw loose. Lyra and Flux monitored the stabilizers as they went to work, the readouts a whirlwind of numbers that would have bewildered most, but to them, it was a symphony of potential disaster. Come on, baby, hold together, Embers whispered, as though sweet-talking the ship might actually make a difference. The ship lurched violently, throwing Ted off his feet, but Jax and the others held their ground, determined to see this through. For a moment, reality warped, the world bending and twisting like it was made of rubber. Stabilizers are fluctuating, Flux said, his voice tense. Just a little longer. Jax could feel his heart trying to escape his chest, each beat a thunderous promise of impending doom. But they held on, trusting in their plan and each other, a motley crew of misfits facing the infinite absurdity of existence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship settled. The vibrations eased, the roar died down, and the readouts began to stabilize. The lights flickered, then held steady, casting a warm glow over the exhausted crew. We did it, Lyra breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Looks like it, Jax confirmed, relief flooding his veins. Everyone's still in one piece. Think I lost a few marbles, but otherwise intact, Embers replied, grinning through the adrenaline high. Flux, who was never one for emotional displays, allowed himself a small, tight-lipped smile. The system's holding. We've isolated the anomalous elements and ejected them. Stabilizers are back under control. And we didn't end up in pudding land, Ted noted, sounding genuinely pleased with this outcome. As the crew shared a moment of hard-earned triumph, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. Well, folks, we did it. We actually did it. Who knew exploiting chaos could be so effective? Lyra said, running a hand through her hair. Maybe we should make it our new business model. You mean we're not already? Jax replied with a laugh. The sense of relief in the room was palpable, each crew member feeling the weight of a near disaster averted. They were battered, bruised, and bone-tired, but they were alive, and in their line of work that was a victory worth celebrating. It's not over yet, though, Flux warned, ever the voice of reason. We've got cleanup to do, and I'd like to avoid any more unexpected guests if possible. Jax nodded, already feeling the familiar pull of responsibility. All right, let's get to it. But first, how about a quick breather? Embers clapped her hands, rallying the troops. Sounds like a plan, just long enough for me to remember how to breathe normally. As the crew dispersed to their various tasks, Jax took a moment to reflect. They'd faced down the multiverse and lived to tell the tale, but the journey was far from over. With every victory came new challenges, and he knew they'd need every scrap of ingenuity, tenacity, and gallows humor they could muster to survive what lay ahead. Here's to us, he murmured, lifting an imaginary toast to the universe that never stopped trying to throw them for a loop. Here's to us, Lyra echoed, raising her own invisible glass with a grin. Even in the darkest corners of space, in the face of absurdity and chaos, there was one constant, this ragtag crew and their unyielding spirit. The universe might be a mess, but it was theirs to navigate, one madcap adventure at a time. And no matter what came next, Jax knew they'd face it together, armed with nothing more than their wits, their camaraderie, and the sure knowledge that, in the end, they'd find a way to laugh in the face of doom. The ship groaned like an old man forced to get up before noon, and Jax felt every bit of its protest rumble through his bones. Nexus 23 might have been foolproof in theory, but whoever coined that term clearly never met his crew. In the chaos, Ted's voice cut through like an uninvited thought at 4 a.m. So, are we doing this paradox thing or just waiting to become cosmic confetti? Ted's hands were doing that nervous dance they did when he was on the edge of a breakdown or a breakthrough. Usually there wasn't much difference. Easy, Ted, Jax replied, more for himself than anyone else. We need the chaos, remember. It's part of the plan. The plan where we play chicken with the fabric of reality, Lyra added, elbow deep in wires, her face smeared with enough grease to start a small oil fire. Just another Tuesday. Flux, who had taken the chaos in stride as he did everything else, was busy recalibrating something that looked suspiciously like a coffee machine, though its innards suggested it might be more interested in tearing a hole in space-time. The calm in his eyes was the same you might see in a poker player holding a royal flush, or a joker with nothing to lose. Paradox is our friend here, Flux said, adjusting a dial with the precision of a neurosurgeon or a bomb diffuser given the stakes. If we time it right, the resulting temporal feedback should reset the hub systems. Should, Embers repeated, her eyes narrowing. Love the optimism, really sells it. Jax could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut but not quite as satisfying as a good cheese. All right, he said, clapping his hands together like he was about to lead a team-building exercise rather than a potentially suicidal maneuver. Let's get this paradox party started. Party? Ted echoed, his expression one of a man who just realized he was the punchline in a cruel joke. We should have brought hats. Too late for hats, Ted, Jax said. We've got chaos to embrace. Lyra was already halfway through the paradox setup, her fingers flying over the console like a pianist playing the world's most discordant sonata. Here goes nothing, or everything. Who knows? With Flux and Lyra elbow-deep in machinery, Jax felt that familiar itch of impending disaster, the kind that usually ended with something on fire, preferably not them. Engage on my mark, Jax commanded, trying to sound more confident than he felt. 3, 2, 1, mark. Lyra hit a button with the enthusiasm of someone hitting a snooze alarm after a night of questionable decisions, and reality did that uncomfortable shimmy it had when it was about to make everyone deeply regret their life choices. The ship's hum crescendoed into a roar, panels flashing like a disco ball on speed. For a split second, Jax was convinced he'd seen infinity, and it looked like it was about to have a nervous breakdown. Tell me we're not imploding, Jax shouted over the cacophony, though the universe seemed undecided on whether to answer. Not yet, Flux replied, his voice as calm as a monk with a death wish. Give it a moment. They waited, every second a question mark dangling over their heads like the sword of Damocles with a particularly wicked sense of humor. The ship bucked and twisted, reality cracking like the world's most terrifying knuckles. Stabilizers are fluctuating wildly, Embers called out, her fingers flying over controls in a vain attempt to harness chaos. Feels like we've angered the gods of physics. Physics deserves it, Jax shot back, bracing himself against the console. Let's just hope it doesn't hold a grudge. For a heart-stopping moment, everything seemed to stretch and contract at once, a surreal funhouse mirror effect that left Jax's stomach somewhere around his boots. He had the distinct impression they were riding a wave of paradox, though it felt more like surfing a tsunami without knowing how to swim. Steady now, Flux murmured, as if coaxing a skittish animal. We've got this. The air sizzled with tension, and for a moment Jax thought he might actually taste paradox, a bit like burnt toast if burnt toast could rewrite the laws of reality. Is this it? Ted asked, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and terror. Is it working? Either that or we're about to become a very strange footnote in history, Lyra replied, not taking her eyes off the console. Gradually, the ship's violent shuddering eased, the roaring subsiding into a more bearable if ominous hum. The lights flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether to stay on or call it quits altogether. Readout stabilizing, Flux announced, his expression somewhere between relief and awe. Did we do it? Jax asked, the question escaping his lips more as a breath of disbelief than anything else. Looks like, Lyra said, pulling back from the console with the satisfaction of someone who just won a game of Russian roulette. We played the universe's game and didn't get eaten. Always a plus, Embers chimed in, her grin sharp as broken glass. And here I was, ready to welcome our new overlords. But did we fix the hub? Ted asked, his voice edged with the kind of hope that suggested he might actually get a full night's sleep for once. Flux checked the monitors, the numbers rolling past with a familiarity that was almost comforting. Systems are resetting. Nexus 23 is stabilizing. Looks like we avoided cosmic catastrophe this time. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the relief a welcome balm to his frayed nerves. Damn, we actually pulled it off. Guess we're not quite the universe's favorite punchline yet, Lyra agreed, cracking her knuckles with a satisfied smirk. Well, don't jinx it, Jax warned, though his grin was as wide as space itself. Let's get this place shipshape before it changes its mind. With the immediate crisis averted, the crew set about repairing the remaining damage. It was a familiar rhythm, the kind that came with the territory of facing improbable odds on a regular basis. Whoever said adventure was glamorous clearly never had to clean up after one, Embers remarked, wiping down a control panel that looked like it had seen better centuries. Or deal with paradox-spawned glitches, Flux added, unruffled as ever. But hey keeps us on our toes. Ted, still looking slightly shell-shocked, was doing his best to help, though his version of helping mostly involved not getting in the way. Well, at least we didn't end up in a universe with no breathable air or, I dunno, giant space bees. Space bees, Jax repeated, laughing despite himself. We've survived everything else, why not those? As the crew settled into the familiar task of making chaos look like order, Jax couldn't help but feel a swell of pride in his team. They'd faced down the multiverse and come out the other side, battered but not broken, and ready for whatever insanity the universe decided to throw their way next. Think we've earned a break, Jax said, stepping back to admire their handiwork, or at least the parts that weren't actively trying to kill them anymore. Break's good, Lyra agreed, stretching her back with a wince. Say a decade or two, maybe not that long, Jax laughed, though the thought was tempting. But long enough for a drink or three. Three, Embers asked, raising an eyebrow. Ambitious of you. Ambitious is my middle name, Jax shot back, though he was fairly certain it was Reginald. Not that he'd ever admit it. As the crew wrapped up their impromptu repairs, they congregated in the main hub, the familiar hum of the ship settling into something almost comforting. Here's to surviving another day with all our atoms in the right place, Jax said, raising an invisible toast once more. Hear, hear, Lyra echoed, her grin as irrepressible as ever. The universe might be a chaotic, unpredictable beast, but Jax knew one thing for certain. With this crew, they could face it all and still find a reason to laugh. And as they shared that moment of camaraderie, he knew they were ready for whatever came next, even if it involved space bees. The air within the teleportation hub felt like a poorly aired crypt, saturated with the kind of tension that could turn the staunchest pessimist into a hopeful nihilist. Captain Jax Vorton stood at the center, resembling a slightly more disheveled version of sanity than usual, a comforting constant amid the chaos. Despite the ship's groaning complaints echoing around him, he felt a peculiar sense of calm. Or maybe it was resignation. Sometimes they were indistinguishable. Ted hovered nearby, his gaze bouncing between the monitors like a rabbit looking for a predator-free exit. So, we're not dead yet. Does that mean something went right? His voice was precarious, balanced on the thin line between hope and hysteria. Don't jinx it, Jax warned, trying to ignore the fact that the console lights were flickering like a neon sign about to give up the ghost. We've still got a universe to pacify. Or several, Lyra Quibble chimed in, exuding an air of grease-smeared confidence as she rerouted a particularly rebellious wire. You know, just the usual multiverse-saving Tuesday, Doctor. Terran Flux, ever the unflappable scientist, was deep in his element, recalibrating the device that might have been a coffee machine in another life. Looks like our paradox gambit paid off. The hub's systems are stabilizing. No cosmic confetti for us today. Shame, Embers drawled, poking at a control panel with a screwdriver that looked more decorative than functional. I was getting ready to embrace my inner star dust. Well, hold off on that existential crisis, Jax replied, smirking. The day's not over. The ship, their ever-reluctant partner in cosmic escapades, seemed to agree, creaking ominously as if reminding them of its own fragility. They might not be cosmic confetti, but becoming interstellar junk was still on the table. Flux adjusted another dial with the precision of a man who'd already accepted his inevitable demise and was just enjoying the ride. You know, if someone asked me how we fixed this mess, I'd say it was through sheer human genius. Or sheer human dumb luck, Ted countered, not missing a beat. Two sides of the same coin, Flux replied, shrugging. But let's go with genius. Sounds better on a resume. Assuming we live to write one, Lyra added, giving the console a final satisfying slap, as if that had been the key all along. There, it's either stable or contemplating implosion at a later date. I vote for later, Jax said, trying to look more captainly than he felt. Preferably much later. The ship's hum lowered to a purr, almost grateful, like an old cat finally settling down for a nap after wreaking havoc on yesterday's possessions. The console's screens, once a chaotic symphony of error messages and existential dread, now displayed the reassuringly dull metrics of a multiverse returning to its regularly scheduled programming. Ted, sensing the shift from imminent doom to probable survival, allowed himself the luxury of a deep breath. So, we did it. We fixed the thing. Looks like it, Embers confirmed, her expression a mixture of surprise and smugness. Take that universe. Jax, feeling a rare surge of optimism, decided to tempt fate. I guess this means we've mastered the art of fixing our own screw-ups. We weaponized our stupidity and won. Humanity's greatest strength, Lyra declared, cracking her knuckles as if preparing for round two with reality. Screwing up until something accidentally goes right. Flux nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It's a pretty consistent strategy throughout history. Worked every time technology didn't kill us first. A beat passed, filled with the comforting clatter of a ship no longer on the verge of tearing itself apart. Relief was a rare luxury, and Jax found himself almost giddy with it. Or maybe that was the adrenaline crash. It was hard to tell in space. Do we celebrate now? Ted asked, his voice filled with the kind of hope usually reserved for puppies finding new owners. Or do we wait for the other shoe to drop? Celebrate first, Jax decided, adopting the authoritative tone of a man who had just snatched victory from the jaws of stupidity. Worry later. Sounds like my kind of plan, Embers agreed, grinning like a cat that not only got the cream but the entire dairy farm. What's on the menu? Whatever hasn't expired, Lyra replied, already heading towards the mess hall with the determination of someone who had earned every calorie. Ted, still in that weird liminal space between anxiety and elation, lingered near the console. You know, I think I'm going to miss the adrenaline rush. Just a little. Flux chuckled, part paternal, part bemused. You say that now. Wait until the next crisis. Which, Jax interjected, with the air of a man trying to stave off future disasters by sheer force of will hopefully be postponed indefinitely. The crew moved as one, a ragtag band of survivors who'd laughed in the face of cosmic absurdity and lived to tell the tale. The mess hall, with its perpetually sticky floors and questionable culinary selection, was a stark departure from the chaos they'd left behind. Ted, with newfound bravado, dared to scrounge up some semblance of a celebratory meal. So, who wants to toast to our collective brilliance? I'll toast to surviving our own idiocy, Embers volunteered, raising a makeshift cup with a flourish. To screwing up less catastrophically next time, Lyra, ever the pragmatist, took a swig of something that smelled vaguely like battery acid, and to not repeating today's experiment, ever, Agreed, Jack said, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished settling in. Although if we do, let's charge admission. Ted laughed, a sound of pure, unfettered relief. Imagine that. Saving the universe one paradox at a time. Jax leaned back, savoring both the moment and the decadently stale aftertaste of space rations. Well, if nothing else, we've proven one thing. And what's that? Lyra asked, eyes glinting with curiosity. That when the universe throws a curveball, Jax paused, looking around at his crew. His team, his family, were just dumb enough to swing. As laughter echoed through the cramped mess hall, the ship continued its steady course, a small bastion of humanity adrift in the vast, indifferent sea of stars. They might not have changed the universe, but for now, they had survived in spite of it. And that in its own way was a triumph worth celebrating. The universe, with its endless capacity for calamity and chaos, would surely test them again. But Jax and his crew would be ready, armed with an arsenal of sarcasm, stupidity, and a brand of tenacity that could only be described as human. With bellies full of dubious nourishment and camaraderie, the crew settled into their bunks, the weary yet satisfied kind of tired that only came after saving a universe on the brink. Sleep came easily, knowing that for today at least they'd bested the odds. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow would take care of itself. With any luck, it might even involve fewer spatial anomalies and a little more peace and quiet. Though with their luck, Jax mused, that seemed about as likely as a universe without disaster. As he drifted off, he couldn't help but smile. After all, if they could survive the multiverse trying to eat them alive, what was a little uncertainty compared to that? They might not have all the answers, or any for that matter, but for now, they had what mattered most. Each other, a ship that was mostly functional, and a universe that hadn't quite managed to outsmart them. Yet, the mess hall was buzzing like a malfunctioning drone, the kind of noise that came from a collective sigh of relief and a few celebratory toasts. Captain Jax Vorton, looking like he just wrestled a cosmic bear and survived, leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't every day you saved the multiverse and lived to tell the tale, even if the tale was mostly about how close they came to cosmic confetti status. Here's to screwing up and not paying the price, Jax announced, raising a mug filled with something that pretended to be coffee, but tasted more like optimism on a bad day. May all our future disasters be equally survivable. The crew echoed the toast, their camaraderie a little forced, but genuine. It was hard to summon genuine cheer when you were living in a universe that had the consistency of a bad joke, but they tried. You know, Ted said, a hint of mischief in his voice, I'm starting to think the universe has a personal vendetta against us. Lyra, ever the realist, rolled her eyes. Ted, the universe doesn't care enough to have a vendetta. We're like ants, annoying but ultimately insignificant. Ah, insignificance, Embers mused, swirling what was left of her drink. The comforting balm of existential crises. Flux, who had been quietly observing, chimed in with a wry smile. Better to be insignificant and alive than significant and squashed. Hear, hear, Jax agreed, clinking his mug against Flux's. Let's not forget, insignificance means fewer expectations. We can only go up from here, or down, Ted pointed out, ever the pessimist. Gravity's a real bitch in space. True enough, Lyra said with a smirk. But hey, at least we mastered the art of messing things up with style. In our line of work, style points count, Jax added, faking a sophistication that was as authentic as their coffee. But on a serious note, we did good today. Secured Nexus 23, saved our skins, and maybe taught the universe a thing or two about human resilience. Resilience or stubbornness, Embers quipped. Sometimes hard to tell. Two sides of the same coin, Flux replied, echoing his earlier sentiment with a nod. But what's really interesting is what the unlikely success of our paradox gambit implies. Ah, here we go, Ted groaned, grabbing a nearby napkin to doodle as a distraction. The philosophical aftermath. Flux ignored the jibe, his gaze distant. Think about it. We're a bunch of humans from a backwater planet in a tiny galaxy. Yet here we are, stabilizing multiversal anomalies with nothing but spit, duct tape, and a generous helping of dumb luck. Jax chuckled. You make it sound like a miracle. Sounds more like desperation to me. Desperation, yes, Flux agreed, but there's a kind of beauty in that. We adapt, we survive, and we occasionally thrive. Beauty is subjective, Lyra chimed in, her voice a mix of sarcasm and sincerity. And I'm pretty sure the universe is nearsighted. The conversation drifted into silence, the hum of the ship providing a soothing backdrop. For a moment, it was easy to forget they were floating in a metal box light years from home, surrounded by a reality that could collapse like a cheap folding chair at any moment. What do you think the universe really wants? Ted asked, his voice soft, almost childlike. Same thing we all want, Jax replied, tipping his chair back precariously. To keep going. To make sense of the mess it's in. Or maybe it just wants us to stop poking holes in it, Ember suggested with a smirk. Ever think about that? Lyra snorted. Sure, but where's the fun in behaving? They all laughed, a genuine sound that felt like a weight lifting, even if only for a moment. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but they had each other, and sometimes that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Do you ever think about what would happen if we didn't make it? Ted asked, the question lingering like smoke in the air. Jax shrugged. Every day. But then I remember that if we didn't screw up enough to save ourselves, someone else would. We're not the only idiots out here. True, Flux agreed. But I'd like to think we're the best of the idiots. Aiming high, Lyra said, raising an eyebrow. I like it. They sat in companionable silence, the kind that only came after narrowly avoiding obliteration. It was one of those rare moments when the weight of existence felt manageable, if only because they'd taken a sledgehammer to their problems and come out the other side. So what now? Ted asked, breaking the silence. We wait, Jax said, leaning back with a sigh. The universe will throw something else at us sooner or later. Until then, we enjoy the peace. Or lack thereof, Lyra pointed out, gesturing to the ship creaking ominously as if reminded of its own existence. Details, Jax replied with a grin. But can we at least agree on one thing? That we survived today, Embers guessed. Nah, Jax said, shaking his head. That if the universe really wants a fight, it's going to have to try harder than this. Their laughter echoed through the mess hall, a defiant sound in the face of cosmic absurdity. They were a motley crew of misfits, each with their own scars and stories, but together they were something more. They were a testament to the enduring human spirit, with all its flaws and stubborn brilliance. As the laughter faded, they fell back into their routines, each finding solace in the mundane tasks that kept the ship running. Life in space wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Jax watched his crew, a sense of pride swelling within him. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was a good start. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they'd face them the only way they knew how, head-on, with sarcasm and a touch of madness. Think we'll get a medal for this? Ted asked, a hopeful glint in his eye. Not likely, Flux replied. But maybe they'll name a black hole after us. Fitting, Lyra said with a wink. We're good at sucking all the fun out of catastrophic situations and turning them into stories, Jax added, leaning against the bulkhead. Here's to the next chapter. The ship continued its journey, a lone speck against the vast canvas of space. They'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a testament to human resilience and stubbornness. The universe might be full of surprises, but so were they. And that, Jax mused, was the real secret to their survival. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing, but about how they faced the chaos. With humor, with hope, and with the audacity to keep swinging, even when the odds weren't in their favor. It was the human way, after all. To adapt, to endure, and to find meaning in the madness. As the ship hummed quietly, a beacon of life in an indifferent universe, the crew settled into their routines, ready for whatever came next. They weren't heroes, but they didn't need to be. They were survivors, and that was more than enough. And as Jax drifted off to sleep, He couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd make it through whatever the universe had in store. After all, they'd already proven one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. They were too damn stubborn to go quietly. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge, another chance to prove themselves. But for now, they had this moment, and that was a victory worth celebrating. And so, with a smile on his lips and a heart full of tenacity, Jax Vorton, captain, survivor, and master of chaos, closed his eyes and let the universe wait. Tomorrow, they'd face whatever came with the same irreverence and resilience that had carried them this far. And if they were lucky, they'd keep doing it for a long time to come.